Welcome to Chronicles of Old Singapore. Mr. Koh Boon Long is back with us today, and we are going to bring the history of education from his experience from the 80s right up to the present. We have got a number of key milestones in the history to cover. Religious education, religious knowledge in the 80s, Asian values in the early 90s, and in 1997, the Twin Towers of Singapore education, Thinking Schools, Learning Nation, and National Education. And we're going to look at the experiences of teachers and students. We are not looking so much at the policy per se, but how Mr. Koh, as an educator and as an official at MOE later on, went through and thought about these policy developments, his roles, his efforts, and what he thinks of how we can improve going forward and what we can learn from history. Just to say why we are looking at these policies, I think they are very interesting in education in Singapore. They are kind of not just policies about the curriculum, but also policies about the cultural aspect of education, in terms of trying to influence the values, the behavior, the thinking of our students, and therefore the teachers as well, parents as well. And the first question I have for you, Mr. Koh, this morning is, we talked a little bit about religious knowledge the last time around.
Yeah, the last time we spoke a little bit about RK. That was the early years when Dr. Goh introduced RK. However, it was not successful because I think the various religion came into the school and they were trying to outbid one another to win converts, the proselytizing process.
RK is so interesting, right? At the time, you were actually at Raffles Junior College, not RI, I beg your pardon. How was RK implemented in a JC?
In the junior college?
Yeah, was it implemented in a
only
JC?
The mission junior colleges. In other words, Catholic High, Anglo-Chinese, St. Andrews. These are the three that had religious knowledge that went through their chapels and all those things. Other than that, the other colleges like Temasek, NJC, Anderson, where I was for a short while, there was nothing much that had anything to do with religious education. So whether it was at the secondary school level or at the pre-U or junior college level, there wasn't anything on RK.
Yeah, I have a slightly interesting story. In the 80s, I was in secondary school, a SAP school, actually, a very Chinese school. And I didn't want to do any of the RK, right? Most of my classmates were doing Confucian studies.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that because my Chinese was really bad. And so I chose Bible knowledge.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do that either because I'm not a Christian, right? So I told my teacher, I don't want to do any of the RK subjects. And she said, okay. So I didn't do any of it. It wasn't compulsory, was it?
No, RK wasn't compulsory.
Although most students took it.
Subject.
Yeah. Although most students took it, isn't it?
Sorry?
Most students took it.
So those who are interested will offer the subject or take up that subject.
It was optional.
Sorry?
Was it optional?
Yeah, it was optional. I kind of remember that because I wasn't in the secondary school at that point in time, that there was any compulsion that they must do RK. Because shortly after Dr. Goh introduced it, it was abandoned, this policy of religious knowledge in schools. So RK was definitely something was not successful at all.
I mean, among your colleagues, in other schools, in the secondary schools, how did they feel about teaching RK?
Oh, they weren't happy with that. Because basically, to them, that's not academic subjects. Okay, and the other thing is, unless they are fervently a person who is into the religion that you are supposed to teach, they usually have to read it up, and then they don't feel convicted to teach that type of knowledge over to the student. So that's partly the problem with teaching as well, with teachers as well.
What about your own opinion? I mean, you are a Christian.
Yeah.
Do you think that religion has a place in schools?
No, I personally would not like religion to come into the school because Singapore is the secular state. Schools, we are talking about the state schools. Their mission is not to inculcate this form of knowledge or beliefs, and it certainly is not a helpful thing to have such a thing into the curriculum. Dr. Go tried to start a new subject called world religion, which was again a shamble, because what aspect of religion you're going to draw into this particular discipline? So to me, we better leave it to whatever religious organization out beyond the government and state institution for them to sort of expand or to reach out to the population that they would do. But if it's value inculcation in terms of building characters, being socially or emotionally affected, that's different. You don't have to have a basis of religion to bring about the subject to life. And it was done later, much later in the 1997, towards that point, even in the 2000s. But in the 1990s, early 1990s, definitely there was no such thing as pushing this particular aspect of education, religious knowledge.
The thing is, at the same time, the 80s, the RK, a lot of it, I think, was actually about values, wasn't it? Values was such a big thing in that decade. I mean, this was also the decade of the national productivity movement, right? Which also affected MOE and the other government ministries and agencies. And a lot of the ideas came from Japan, where the idea was the organization is like your family, right? And you got to work as part of a team,
Yeah.
So this was actually quite value driven, and the purpose was to increase productivity. But also to get people to work together, and not just a change. Therefore, in the last podcast, you talked about the rugged individualism of the
Yeah.
1960s. So there was now
Yeah.
a shift away from that, seemingly, to try to get Singaporeans to work
Collective
together.
minded.
To
Yeah.
be community minded, to be family minded, and all that. Do you see that happening in that decade, in the 80s and the early 90s, before NE?
If you ask me, there wasn't any particular uh, movement in Singapore towards that aspect of the individual uh, soul or searching for a person greater than himself or whatever. But the inculcation of values like national values, that was the thing that was happening. The identity with the state, the feeling that we are greater than the state, or the collective will is greater than the individual will. Those are things which you don't need religion to underpin that. In fact, some religion might even sabotage that because the feeling is God is the highest, and therefore your allegiance, your loyalty should be to God and in God Himself. So I I don't think Dr. Go got it right. I mean, I personally feel that he was influenced by the fact that he went to Anglo-Chinese school, and he had some basis that he feels that that would be good for the schools. Not all schools require that. Yes, the mission school with the missionary, they could inculcate that. But at the same time, I don't think they intend to sabotage what the state were trying to do in terms of building a nation, national values, the fact that we are multiracial, even multi-religious especially, and we speak different languages. But the fact was that we can exist as a nation without having to be of having a belief in ourselves. Um, I mean, I think the Indonesian Republic Constitution says that a person must own a religion or must be, belong to a religious sect or group or whatever. But in Singapore, you don't really need that. People who are atheists, people who are non-believers, they should have place in our society. And I think, to me, to put in RK into the school curriculum, it I think in the early stage was compulsory, if I remember correctly. So there were a lot of resistance. But towards the end, I think they make it okay. Those who want to do may carry on with that, but not really supported by the school principal. I think, except for those principals who feel that there's opportunity for them to proselyte or to bring in their own religion. I'm definitely against that because I feel that even though I'm practicing Christian, I don't believe that we should, abuse lah. To me, abuse our authority or our leadership to spread what you believe personally in. So I believe that there are schools which are Buddhist schools. All right, they they don't go about pushing the religion in some ways. Okay, madrasa will be different matter because that is truly a religious school. All right, but if it's state sponsored, government aided, it is not a right thing to do to have RK in the curriculum. Okay, or any part of it. If you are mission school, you have your chapel, you have your services, or whatever it is after school hours. Okay, so that's my position. And I think Dr. Tony Tan, although he was a Christian, he didn't push it very much when he took over from Dr. Go. And I think Dr. Tan, towards the end of his term, he served in MOE from 1985 to 1992. Towards the end, I think he's believed in moving towards aspirational or ability guided type of focus for the schools. So I think there was some change there. But really, the next change that came about, or reform, if you call it educational reform, was more towards the end of 1990s. All right, in the early 90s, there was one thing which happened in the early 1990s, which I didn't mention the last podcast, which I thought that when I became a principal in 1992, in 1993 there was an announcement. I think it was done by Admiral Teo when he took over. No, not Admiral Teo. Was done by Lee Yock Swan. All right, Mr. Lee Yock Swan, in 1993, when he declared that he was streaming. I'm not sure. It must be. I mean, I believe that. I don't think he initiated thing, but it was brought in to include or subdivide the one stream into two. That is the normal stream. The normal stream became normal academic and normal technical. So that's a very strange thing because it happened in 1993, and by then it was already from 1980s to 1993, about 13 years, and yet they refine it and they say it will be better, but really it made it worse. To me, that was another trigger which brought about that criticism later on in the late 1990s. All right. and especially in the 2000 when Mr. Taman came in, others more enlightened minister came in. So let me say that in the 1990s there wasn't much happening as far as reform is concerned, but this particular aspect of streaming being more intensified because normal tech was the worst of the worst. I when I became a I was away from 1980s in the university, and when I came back to teach, I was away from the secondary school. So I missed this thing about how they transformed the school because of streaming into various courses, express, uh, special, gifted. Gifted was introduced in 1984. It was another special stream, a special privilege for those at the upper end. So Mr. Lee Oxman, when he announced it seems very strange. And when I came back to school, I look at the situation when I was a principal. Already the normal usual student was already demoralized. Now, the following year in 1994, we are going to have two such group of people. One will be the normal academic, which is ironical because the word academic didn't apply to them at all, right? Because to them, uh, they came to school well with a poor grade from the PSLE, and they didn't think that academic was that critical. But whatever it is, they came because their parent insisted they came. That's a normal academic. But another group, smaller in size, in the school, but not necessarily a smaller class, but there were not as many classes of normal technical. So that's the one that really brought about some feeling that we are really pushing the tail end of streaming, such that it is really, I would term it as victimization of these people who are being pushed right to the very tail end and the normal tech. So I would say that that was a strange thing in the 1990s when reform was in the air, but really this was not reform. It's a retrogressive or regressive steps that were taken. So that's my feel. But towards the end of that era, of that decade, 1990s decade, that was a time when when Mr. Emeritus Theo came in. I think he saw the damage that streaming has done quite a bit, and he looked around, and I think he did some research as well as speaking to parents and all those people, and he pushed towards the period when we would phrase it as time when we had ability driven form of students to give their own opportunity to do their to their best in where they can excel in. So that period from 1997 to 2011, okay, 13 years, I would say that that will be a better period than the earlier phase where it was Dr. Goh who started this thing called eviction-driven education in Singapore. Okay, that's how my take of how reform was done over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 92 to 97, you were principal at Christchurch, and 97 to 2001,
Yeah.
principal at Bedok Town.
Yeah.
Did these
Yeah.
schools have normal tech students?
The school that I was assigned to be the principal had only one express class. There were three normal academic classes. There were three normal in that year. There was no normal academic or normal tech. So in 1992, there were one express, which is a small class. Surprisingly, there wasn't much takers for the express in that area, and the student cohort for that year was four classes, and the other three were all normal students. Yeah. And so 1992, 93, they were normal students. By 94, there was new intake in Sec 1, where we had a large group. Again, I had one express class again, and we had three normal and to normal technical. That's very strange, you see, because the school became a normal school. Well, I felt that it was a very hard task for me to move it up. Yeah.
So, was it possible for a principal, to do something to ameliorate, the effects of streaming at the
Yeah.
school level? Was it possible?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
try to do that?
So the task of the team, my teachers and myself, was that we took special care not to highlight the express. That's one. In comparison to the normal student, whether they were normal academic, normal tech. Then we also ensure that non-academic activities suitable for the normal student, hands-on experiential learning, or even camps, as I mentioned, those things which the normal would be much more comfortable with, hands-on, things like drawing or doing exercises or playing game. All those things we highlight so that they will feel that they are welcome, they are also appreciated in comparison to those that did well in the academic arena where they win prizes in essay writing or in public speaking or whatever. So we try to moderate the atmosphere in the school. I will call it the culture or the school climate that will come about by not stressing too much on the pursuit of the exams and the pursuit of just studying and learning things for the sake of exams. All right. So those are things that we could do at the school level. But the trouble with it, if you look at the system level, then you said, okay, you are giving this. At that time, there was no such thing as autonomy being mentioned to schools. But because I was in the aided school, I took the liberty to do some of this thing and moderate that stress on exams. But then, unfortunately, my supervisor would be coming with ideas of the ministry and said how school must excel, how they must excel in terms of the exam score, the results, and all those things. So there's a contradiction in term when you talk about building personalities or helping students not to feel being outcast or being feel stigmatized or being seen as not welcome in the school system. Okay, so I would sort of maybe portray that period when I first started the school. Yeah, but towards the end, I think there were gradual acceptance or gradual uh, maybe not just acceptance but also awareness that this cannot go on with that 40% of the student cohort being looked down upon. All right. So there was effort by Mr. Teo Chi Hian or Emma Teo to bring about this ability or aspirational aspect to the student's life. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to ask about the teachers, who were teaching the normal technical students specifically, right? Because my wife was a teacher
Yes.
sometime the late 2000s, early 2010s,
Yeah.
and she taught some technical classes, and it's like the students, everything that comes out of their mouth is F and CB, and it was very difficult compared to teaching the normal academic students. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
could you talk about how teaching normal tech students, affected teachers' morale?
Yeah. Uh, I think it badly affected the morale of most schools for teachers who were assigned to teach those. There, there are one very there are occasionally teachers who embrace that, which I thought was really very marvelous of them to be willing to say, I volunteer, I will prefer that. But by and large, most teachers are afraid to step into such classes, partly because they came with a mindset that in classes, their main task is to make sure that students pass with good grades. All right. So that mindset was difficult to change for them. And other aspects of normal will be that class management is more difficult, definitely more difficult because the student tends to have a shorter attention span, less motivated, and sometimes they also could be disruptive, which affects the delivery of the lesson. All right, so I would say that morale was pretty affected, badly affected by then, because the student um, were came with a feeling that look, there isn't much that I could attain, and I was, I mean, the student will feel that they were together with a similar group of students that they reinforce that feeling or that thinking that they were not appreciated or they were not wanted in the school because some of them create problems. And then there's collective punishment, unfortunately, which I noticed in some classes. Okay, so the best solution to those things, I would, uh, I actually spoke to the inspector. At that time, there were inspectors. I said the best thing would be we push towards smaller classes size for the normal and normal tech. All right. Eventually, the normal tech they had uh, after a long, maybe I'm not too sure of the year when this was instituted or when this started. That they had two teachers. One called the
Mm.
AED, the adult educate. The adjunct educators, or they are not really trained as teachers, but they help the teachers with the management of class and, of course, if possible, also to prepare the whatever worksheet or whatever they could do. All right, so that was one way, but it was really only towards the very end of the 1990s, by the 2000, that there was some effort to ensure that there were the loads of the teacher. That's the other thing. The loads of the teacher were teaching in normal or normal tech classes would be lessened to some extent, and also that the in the class itself, in the physical presence, they would have another person helping that main teacher. Okay, those were some of the efforts being made.
Yeah, this thing about the class sizes has,
Yeah,
been so difficult to tackle. I mean,
yeah.
do you think the issue is really financial or economic?
It's more economics. I mean, they claim that they won't have good teachers. Even if the teacher is three-quarter or 60% of a well-trained teacher, very good practitioner, then I think we should accept that and not just said that we must reach 90% or 95% of qualified teacher. So they were talking about quality teachers. The teaching must be up to that level. But it is a very numerous argument, because you can to some extent assess a teacher's capability in terms of classroom management or delivery or that, but you can't say exactly, well, this one is so much better. All right, you can roughly put into maybe three groups: that the top group, third, the first third, that are fairly good teachers, and the middle category, in the last category. You can do that, but I think they were saying, well, you must have everyone in the first 10% or 15%. So that was the argument. The state, uh, well, not just the state, but even the leadership at the MOE, I would say that very frankly, the leadership at MOE were not pressing the political leaders for more teachers in the system at that point of time. Now it's different, because now, of course, we currently we have some excess teachers here and there. All right. So economics was the factor from the political point of view, but from the other aspects of the administrators, meaning the MOE non-political leadership, the director of education or director of school and all that, their concern was that your quality of teaching may go down. So I don't buy into that argument. All right, I've spoken up very frankly at forums and all that, and it didn't work because they say, well, you have two strong arguments. One is that it will cost more. All right, but if you want to bring this education to dollar and cents, then definitely it hurts the student on the spot or the teachers in the classroom as well. So that's my feeling about the period when I was a principal. I could feel that the teachers were struggling in many instances, and then that affected their morale.
Can I quickly ask you about your wife?
My wife,
Yes. How long was she a
yes,
teacher?
yeah, okay. So stressed to a great extent during those periods, and because she was one who will not argue back, and she accepted many of um, the tasks, or the duties that were assigned to her, which were not wanted, or some other teachers will resist. Right. So I think that's her character. I'm not sure why, but she was born that way. And partly also, I think she felt that she should not push her weight because her husband is a principal. Okay, I mean that could be one of the reason, but mainly because she is a very mild mannered person, and she doesn't fight the system. I wouldn't say fight, but simply defer to it and accepting most of the loads that were given. So most of the years, uh, she was not teaching any express classes. Correct? She was considered as one of the better normal classes, and therefore, you see, that's a problem. If somebody is doing well in those areas, then you are punishing the willing, punishing those that are accepting, and so you carry on that way. That's my feel about teachers who, and so I make it a point. I will say, yes, you are a very good normal teacher, but if you feel stressful, come and see your head of department, or come and see me, and we will work out something. And I think that will help the teacher. The assurance that that person is not like condemned into that area. When I came back in 1994, sorry, in 1992, I was there as the principal in 1993. But in 1994, when this thing came about of the normal tech, all right, 1994 actually, because 1993 was the announcement. I remember one teacher said to me very clearly, Mr. Koh, I think we already had a number like this, and he was to some extent helping the discipline master. He was the assistant discipline master. So he said to me very frankly, and I think I appreciated that. He said that over the years that I've taught here, the quality of a student has not improved, but it's not so much that fact that they can't perform an exam or that. That's okay because if they try their best to learn, that's fine. He said something very pertinent. He said it's more that their conduct, their attitude has worsened. All right, that's one. So he said he used a term, and sometimes he said, he used a term and he said he sometimes felt that he was dealing like juvenile delinquents, like in from coming back from reform centers or boys' home or whatever it is. Mainly the boys, by the way. The girls didn't give much of that thing. They become silent resistance, I think. Okay, so he said, Mr. Koh, now we have the normal tech. It looks like they are hardcore prisoners that came out from jails. And I was a little taken aback, but I took to him, I said, yeah, we have to face that. And he said, how? I said, we will not try to push in things that they can't perform. That's one thing I said. If you find that the lesson is boring, then get them to do some hands-on work, bring them out to the class, take a walk or whatever it is. Don't worry if at the end of the year we are not going to measure. The only thing that I will stress at the school will, if they want to do exam assessment of how they perform, percentage score and all that. I say you just look at my express. Don't look at my normal or normal tag because that's not my emphasis. Of course, I am being black marked for that because they will say, why? This is a whole school. I would say no. The reason is on the ground. We cannot do something which is against the nature of the student because they can do, but it will take a longer time and you will have to have special training. I think we one thing that I felt that teachers were not specially trained for the normal tech. That was it. No retraining. Over the years, when we had technical education, the teachers who went for training, craft, and all those things. But why was it that this special group of students came in and we just pushed them to the deep end of the pool? So that's my concern. And I shared that feeling with those teachers who were made to do or to made to teach those classes.
Yeah, I guess because I guess there's no training simply because no one knows how to deal with the students put in that situation,
Yeah.
together streamed as normal students. Or do you think there's a way that we can train teachers and prepare them?
Um, their family, okay, these students mainly come from students or homes that of lower income group, probably broken homes and all that. So if you want teachers to teach in those classes, then you must have more support for them. That's one. Uh, the council, the full-time council at that point of time was not in place yet. All right, that's one. Number two, if they could be given some elementary counseling skill or some form of understanding a background and how to reach out to the teachers. Okay, in house we could do that, in school, but that was not really effective because how many of us had the expertise to do that? I used to get family service center person who come in and give some advice here and there, but that really had to be a practitioner who has gone through that teaching of students with difficulties. We will not want to say they are difficult students. We will say students with difficulties of learning actually. Yeah, but then from there it led to things which are attitudinal or behavioral as well. All right, so those things. It's very tough because once you are labeled or once you are categorized at that, there's this feeling in them that they are not worthy, self-worth, their self-esteem uh, definitely are lower than those who are in the better classes, okay, in the express classes. Yeah,
Mm. Right. I have one more question before we go to 97.
yeah.
And that is in the 80s and early 90s. Do you see a change in the, you know, thinking and mindset and behavior of students? Were they changing from, the Jalan Lama, the early 1970s
Yeah,
students? Were they
yeah.
changing? Were they becoming like more westernized, for example?
Because of basically the media to
Yeah.
some extent, the country became slightly more affluent by the 80s. There's one factor that probably they may not acknowledge. The smaller size of the family also affects students becoming more uh, they use the word pampered, but more the feeling that they should be given more room for their own aspiration. Okay, which is not a bad thing, but to extend that they want to be always been given the privilege. That's not too good. All right. So yeah, there were changes from the early days because the expectation changed, their own expectation, that as they noticed that the other their peers also manifest things like going out to eat at fast food centers or going for cinemas and all that. So that's bound to change as society develop, as we become more urbanized and developed as a developed country. So yeah, so students they definitely would be more difficult in some ways, more difficult to teach, but also challenging to teach. I would use the word more challenging to teach. But at the same time, I think those teachers who are adaptable, those teachers who move with time, I think they enjoy the greater sense of challenge in the class, and also they enjoy the interaction in the class. Because previously, the mode was just simply teacher centered and delivering a lesson, but now there's slightly more interaction, and even group work, they were starting to form by the 1990s, all right? But by the 80s were less of that, but by the 1990s, they were there. So I think that's the transformation over the decades.